Hope all you can hear me properly. Yeah. Today we are going to discuss into Golang. There are actually I will briefly discuss about our problem, the problem we had, and then I will discuss the approach and the design of the solution we suggested, and also how we evaluated our solution, and then we will discuss what we have gained with our solution and problems faced after real users and future works, our future plans. So let's start with the problem. Before that, let me explain what our service was. Actually, our service was a microservice. We had multiple instances of it, and 80% of outbound traffic was handled by that. Using that service, we had different SFTP based operations. It's like a SFTP client, but it handled different type of operations like move and copy, put operations, and likewise. So most of the traffic handled by that service. We had hundreds of different SFTP servers connected with that microservice. Actually, the problem was high CPU usage. It's constant high CPU usage. We noticed that it's 12% on average. Sometimes there were peaks, but on average it was constant 12%. And we investigated the reason for that. So when we deeply investigated, we noticed that the SSH handshake was the problem. That was the SSH handshake was the part where it contributed to the highest CPU usage. So most of the processing power were taken by that. So we thought that we can improve the SSH handshake part. So this is the service architecture. Our service was written in Scala, and we run it on JVM, OpenJDK hotspot. And the underlying library that was used for SFTP operations was JSCH, which was a famous one, and we have been used it for a long time. So we had a service wrapper within the microservice. We had a service wrapper which is responsible for integrating with the service bus of the entire architecture, and we had custom business logic based on SFTP and SSH, and we had, as I explained, an underlying library, JSCH library, and it was executed on JVM. So this SSH handshake part was implemented in JSCH. As we noticed in their source code, it was written in pure Java. Yeah, that's about the service architecture. Actually, most of the CPU intensive thing was creating the establishing the SSH handshake, like sharing the, exchanging the ciphers and key exchange algorithms and all those stuff. So we thought about a solution. So we thought we can start with the SSH library. We thought better to replace the SSH library in service. And we tried to evaluate a couple of solutions, and we thought better to replace the handshake part with the native library, where the instructions are not executed by the JVM rather than the processor directly. We thought that would reduce the CPU usage. So this was the proposed solution. We tried to rewrite it or replace the SSH handshake part with a native component, and we wanted to glue it to the existing architecture of the service, because we couldn't rewrite the entire service. It was not feasible at that point. We had a lot of things in service wrapper as well as in the business logic, so it was not feasible to do that at the first phase. So in service wrapper, we had different integrations with the service bus, likewise, and also handling keys, those things. So we tried to start with the CPU intensive part. So this was the high level design of the solution. So it will run on the JVM. And then, yeah, this is the design of that integration. So we thought we evaluated different things for the native part. So we selected Golang for that. I will discuss in the next slide the reason behind that. So we thought do the SSH handshake thing in Golang and integrate it with the service. So this was our design. Actually, initially we had an abstract SFTP session. We had an interface or a trait, Scala trait for that. There we had abstract methods for that, and we already had the default implementation of that operations. It was this default SFTP session. This was written in Java and Scala. This was the client code, the business logic. So we started with starting with a new implementation. Let's name it native SFTP session. So in that native SFTP session, we associated a native library wrapper. So via that, actually that was the glue code between our service and the library, native library. We used initially we used JNA, Java Native Access, for the proof of concept, because we need to do a proof of concept for that before investing developer time on that. In the proof of concept, we use JNA due to the simplicity, and actually it was an already established project and very old project. It was reliable, and we implemented the code in Golang and compiled it as a C library. Actually, since our then I will discuss why we choose Golang for that. Golang for the native implement the native functionality because it's fast and efficient. Actually, it's lightweight. Obviously, it's lightweight than Java, Java or the JVM, and it had good platform support because it had support for almost all the platforms, including Alpine, all the stuff. So we don't limit our service or we don't strictly bind to a particular platform. So we can go with any platform, Linux-based platforms. Then we evaluated the developer friendliness of the Golang. Actually, it's a fun language to work with, and we thought developers would happy to learn that, because we had most of our developers with familiar with Java and Scala. We wanted to introduce something that will not take much time to learn the concepts, and we wanted our developers to get productive with that during a short period. And we noticed that Golang had better interoperability support. It's CGO. Also, Golang provides a good concurrency support that would help us in the future plan in case of we decide to rewrite the entire service in Golang. This would really help us because our service was handling concurrent stuff for fetching fetching. So that will also be an added advantage for us in the future. And Golang had a feature-rich standard library, and most importantly, it had a good SSH package as well, the crypto SSH package. So we chose the Golang in order to implement the native functionality. The evaluation part. We wanted to evaluate before implementing the SSH functionality. We wanted to evaluate how Golang perform. So we used Linux perf tools. This is an example output of perf tools. So we implemented different set of, also we had a look at benchmark results compared to Java for different algorithms. We noticed that most of the cases Golang performance is better than Java. So we tried a couple of implementations of famous algorithms in order to evaluate that. So we implemented the same algorithm in Java and Golang, and we used perf tools in order to see what's going on in the underlying of the application of the program. So we tried perf tools. So using perf tools, we could get an impression of utilized CPU and executed instruction set of executed number of instructions and branch misses and all this stuff. So first of all, we started with a simple hello world. There we took number of machine instructions executed in order to display a simple hello world comparatively to the Java. So we implemented hello world in Golang and Java. Obviously, Java had enormous number of instructions executed because it had to start the JVM and the instrumentation, JMX and all the stuff. It's no wonder that Java had a large number of machine instructions executed. So Golang had extremely small number of machine instructions. So that's not fair because JVM is a large thing. It have a lot of things apart from executing our program. So we use number of iterations in order to see the performance. So we implemented a basic implementation of a factorial algorithm, and we used number of iterations. So the initial number of fact there. So we gave a fair chance for both Golang and Java, and this is the result. The x-axis represent number of iterations we executed factorial algorithm with with the given set of numbers. So here we can clearly see Java takes much higher number of machine instructions in order to execute the same thing. Golang uses much lower machine instructions in order to achieve the same result. So we check with the branch misses. We check whether how predictive the generated for the compiled code. So with Java, number of branch miss possibility compared to Golang. So when we increase the number of iterations, the generated or the compiled Go code is much better than the Java compared to number of or the percentage of branch misses. So that's also a good point for us. That will also increase the performance of the program. And then we wanted to see what about the actual thing that we wanted to achieve. So after evaluating Java and Golang for different algorithms, we directly started writing SSH handshake in Golang, and we use Docker stats constantly in order to get the average CPU used. So we sent or we initiated number of SFTP or SSH connections. We executed it with Java and as well as Golang. So this is the result. We noticed that Golang uses much less CPU usage compared to the JCH, because Go is compiled, and as well as JCH is pure Java implementation. It had a lot of things behind the scene, because the JVM optimized the code at runtime and de-optimized it based on the usage, and also it has a lot of things, a lot of instrumentation and a lot of things going on. So as a result, we noticed that the CPU usage was much less with Golang. Then we checked with the total time spent for the handshake as well. So we noticed this as less usage of CPU, it had spent less time for the handshake when it implemented with Golang. This is the result. This is what we gained actually. We noticed the CPU usage was dropped by 70%, and the SSH handshake duration was reduced by 20%. So that was a good sign for us. So we implemented the rest of the things with Golang based on the SSH and crypto package. So after that, we deployed it on production. Actually, we kept the initial Java implementation as well, because we didn't drop it entirely. In case we encounter problems, we can toggle the implementation. So these are the problems we faced. We noticed that some of the key exchange algorithms were not supported by the Golang implementation. Actually, key exchange algorithms as well as some of the ciphers. After investigating, we noticed that they were dropped. The support of those ciphers and the KEX algorithms were dropped by the Golang implementation during 2013 because they were not safe. Actually, we could inform our clients about that in order to upgrade their servers, but not most of the cases they are not agree to change with that. So we could toggle the implementation for those particular endpoints or the particular SFTP servers. So those traffic, those SFTP traffic, we routed via the previous implementation, and we migrated around 97% of the traffic via the Golang. So also we, before deploying it on production, we did profiling and we checked for memory leaks. So far it works pretty well on production. We are really happy with the performance and the efficiency of Golang component and the reliability, of course. Also, we, as we expected, we had some improvements. We required some improvements and some feature requests for our SFTP component. Our developers could easily learn Golang, and they got productive within weeks, and we could cater those requirements with our new component. Our future works. Yeah, we are planning to totally drop the Java implementation and keep only the native component. And we are planning to performance evaluation with JNR, because for the POC we use JNA since it's really easy to work with. So, but that was not a big overhead for our application. Initially we thought JNA would be an overhead, so we thought to drop that, but after doing profiling, we noticed that that's not the case. So anyways, we are going to do some performance evaluation with JNR, and we are planning to implement the entire service wrapper in Golang, so we can have a total rewrite of the service in Golang. Yeah, that's about it. Any questions? Then, if you have any question, please.
Kanishka, can you see the chat?
Sure. Yeah, Asis is asking a question. Sorry, it's he's asking for uploading this on YouTube. That's a question. Do you see any disadvantages when using Golang? Actually, initially we thought to implement the native library in C, but because it was a really good and an old implementation. If we wrote it in C, we could got much advantage from the OpenSSH project. Anyways, we selected Golang because it's really easy to get productive, and it's also garbage collected. Actually, during implementing this component and maintaining this, we didn't notice much disadvantages about Golang. So it's really productive for developers. They were happy to work with, and they quickly learned the concepts and started working on that. When it comes to this, the main problem was it was not compatible. I mean, it was not easily pluggable to our CI/CD platform, because we had our CI/CD platform for Java and SBT based projects. That was a challenge. Apart from that, I didn't notice any major disadvantages. One thing, there we noticed that compared to Java, Golang had less number of alternatives. So when it comes to Java, we have tons of libraries implemented for a particular requirement. But in Golang, we had different libraries, but compared to Java, the number was really low, and they were relatively new compared to Java. But Golang standard library was really good. Are there any solid frameworks for microservices like Spring Boot in Java? Yeah, there are a couple of Micronauts and Quarkus, but both relatively new. But Quarkus project is maintained by Red Hat. Actually, it can be run on GraalVM, so we can create native images if we implement our project based on Quarkus. So there, I have tried Quarkus for a couple of projects. I noticed that it uses really less, it requires really less resources, like CPU and memory. Those are the new frameworks for Java. Actually, compared to Spring Boot, Quarkus apps require much less resources, and also it's not we can compile them using GraalVM native image. What about the tools available for testing code in Golang? Yeah, Golang has built-in tools for testing. Also for benchmarking, also they have inbuilt support. For testing, I think it's sufficient to use the inbuilt support in Golang. Using that, we can write tests, and we can do performance tests as well. Any questions? if you have any comments about our approach, just share it with us. We can improve it based on your suggestions as well.
Okay. Thank you, Kanishka. We learned a lot from you. Now it gave pleasure for me to introduce our next speaker, Doshna Gupta, who is going to talk about REST API with Go. Doshna, can you share your screen?
Yeah, thank you, Pramod. I'll just share my screen. Is it visible?
Yeah, we can see.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. So today I'll be talking about how can you build your first REST API. So it would be very beginner level thing and basic stuffs in the starting. Yeah. So this is a bit about me. I'll start with myself first. So currently I work at Exotel. I primarily code in Golang. It's been 2 years for me that I have been coding in Golang, with dealing with REST APIs in Golang. And I also contribute to open source, and I've been contributing to Mozilla for the past 5 years as a volunteer. And I'm right now enrolled into 2 programs, Mozilla Tech Speaker and Mozilla Reps. And I try to contribute to the add-ons community of Mozilla. So in case you have any queries related to any of these things, you can ask me at the end of the session, or you can DM me at this Twitter handle anywhere. So today I'll discuss these few stuffs, which will be consisting of APIs, what are actually APIs, what are actually REST APIs, and how can actually you create your endpoints, and what are the HTTP methods, and if you have created some endpoint, how can you secure one for your production level code, and just for writing unit test cases, how can you write? I'll give you a small brief over that. And the main purpose of API is obviously with respect to the production level code, so which involves to have the best practices, so which is very important, and I'll try to cover these things today. So let's start with basically what is an actually API. Most of us know actually that API, the full form is acronym for Application Programming Interface, right? So the thing, this is quite a very technical term. I'll try to put it in very layman right now. Firstly, by giving an example. So let's just imagine you are sitting in a restaurant, just you have a menu with yourself and you want to order something, right? And there is also a kitchen which will obviously which will have chefs and which will provide you the food which you want. But the problem here is these are two components. You are sitting in the restaurant and the kitchen is also in the restaurant itself even. But these are two different places, right? Even if you distinguish that. The problem is these are some missing component. If you'll try to figure it out, then you can easily guess that the waiter is missing, right? So this is what I call it waiter as a REST API itself. So whenever there are two applications, or whenever there is client or server, so whenever two applications needs to communicate with each other, they need a intermediate stuff which is called as API. So this is one of the lamest example which I can give or I can tell. But if I talk about technically, so it would be something like whenever you are sending a message on Facebook, whenever you are tweeting, or you are viewing some Instagram pictures or doing something related to social media, or writing a Gmail, a compose mail, the everything is actually about API. So behind that, you are actually dealing as a user, you are using the APIs. So at the end of the day, this real world, this internet world is full of APIs. Whether you are tweeting, whether you are liking any story, it's all about APIs in backend. So like if you are pinging someone on Facebook, you are using their API, Facebook's API actually. So let's see. So I've given you an overview what is an actually API, and you can consider it as like you have a Twitter account, you're trying to tweet, you're hitting the Twitter's API for tweeting. So basically right now I have mentioned about the API, but what is actually REST API? There are lots of buzzwords like REST API, RESTful. What is this? So basically it is nothing. It is actually right now the basic, it is actually, it means that representational state transfer. So it is a web standard basically based architecture which uses HTTP protocol. And in the earlier word, there were SOAP technologies which was used, that kind of architecture which was getting used. But nowadays REST is very popular because of its few principles and its features, which are streamlined, and it is a lightweight web service. As compared to the previous technology like SOAP, REST is actually very lightweight. It requires only very less bandwidth to work upon. So which is why it is quite popular nowadays. You will see that all the APIs are mostly REST APIs. And because of the performance, it is stateless, and it is kind of portable as well. So since it is stateless, you can actually run it, you can actually scale it to n number of things, n number of servers. So which gives the power to REST to actually run all over the internet right now. So it is nothing, just architecture design or design patterns to build APIs basically. And the major component which the way REST deals is, it has a client server model, in which if you, this is very quite layman as well, in which there is a REST client. If that needs to retrieve some information, it will try to contact the REST server, and in return REST server will try to give the response back to the client. So let's say if you want to see the home feed of your Facebook, so you are the client, and it will actually try to access the Facebook server, and Facebook server will give you the response back on your Facebook app. This is how REST client deals, and this is quite similar to the how internet world works. And next question, which generally is asked everywhere, even in interviews, or most of the people who are new to Go, they are try to ask me that why REST in Go? We can have REST API. You can build REST APIs in Python. You can have in Java. You can have it anywhere, right? But why REST in Go? It's just I keep it very simple. It's just because of Go. Whatever the features of Go are there, right? It actually helps anyone to build a REST API in Go. So the concurrency, which is the USP of Go, or the way the inbuilt libraries of Go, or even the community of Go, which is very strong. It keeps on getting updated. The new features, it has a very good documentation if someone wants to start with something. It has third-party libraries, very good. Even sometimes you don't even need to use that third-party libraries. It is a strongly typed language, and also the thing is it's very simple and clean as compared to other languages. This is what I think. Apart from Python, Python and Go are quite similar in looks clean, and it's readable. You can easily pick it up in very few days. And I used to work in Java, and I could easily pick up in a week. So I can actually vouch on this. So this is why I'm talking about REST today in Go. So let's start with some code snippets. So as I mentioned, I talked about APIs in conceptual way. I talked about REST API. So let's see how can you actually build your own server, have your own APIs running on a server. So I'll first demonstrate the snippet, and later on I'll show you the demo as well at the end of the session, so that I can go accordingly as per the time. So here, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to import the net HTTP inbuilt library, which is actually for creating the HTTP server. So I'm trying to use NetHTTP. It's a self-sufficient inbuilt library of Golang. And I'm trying to, this HTTP listen server will actually start a server on the port 3000, and you can actually hit localhost 3000 and you can see that your server is running. And this is a very basic stuff which you're gonna do when you are creating a API. But the inbuilt library, I would say it's self-sufficient, but we, in a production level code, we try to use third-party libraries. There are various third-party libraries like Zin, Echo, but the most popular is Gorilla Mux. It is quite popular and I've been using for the quite 1.5 years, and I realized that it's pretty straightforward or simple, and it gives you the leverage over the few of the things like dealing with the variables, dealing with the query parameters in APIs. So Gorilla Mux is nothing, just a HTTP request multiplexer, and it's very powerful URL router and dispatcher. So what happens is, whenever a request comes, whenever someone hits the API, it will actually, the Gorilla Mux will actually see the routes, will actually check the incoming request against those listed routes, and as per those routes, it will call the specific handler with whosoever it matches the URL. So I'll show you this in the demo as well. So this is how I'll import the Gorilla Mux third-party library in Golang, and this is how your small snippet, small API would look like. So I'm trying to import Gorilla Mux library, and I'm creating a router which actually creates a route. Basically, it's create an object router, and if I hit localhost 3000 and backend slash, and whatever the things are written in home handler, it will be running logically. Same thing, if I use these APIs, then it will be running the code backend code behind these handler, whatever the logic you have written. And we'll see this once I'll make more basic things clear. So next, another major component is if you are writing any API, you need to deal with HTTP methods or HTTP verbs. These are also called verbs. So we generally see that just you need to create a CRUD API. So what is actually CRUD? CRUD is nothing but it's just create, read, update, delete. So whenever you want to create some resource, so let me give you an example. Let's say you want to sign up on a website. Let's say it's Facebook. You are trying to sign up, registered as a user. So you are trying to store your information or create your resource. Basically, resource is your details basically in the database of Facebook. So in that case, Facebook will use post method for that API. Similarly, if you want to see the home feed of your Facebook app, whatever the home stories or latest news things are there, latest posts are there, you want to see, then you are just reading. You are not modifying the database of Facebook. You are not modifying the resource basically. So in that way, you're just retrieving the resource. In that case, you will be using get method. And for put or update, basically update whenever, let's say you have already created the resource, you want to update your name on Facebook. In that case, you will be updating your resource in the backend of Facebook, right? In that at that place, in that scenario, you would be using put method. And let's say you want to deactivate or delete your account, you would be using delete for that API. I hope this is very clear, and this is layman kind of thing. So I'll move forward fastly. So this is a code snippet. If you'll see, you can see that there are APIs, movies, but with different get, post, put, delete methods. So I'll tell you what is the difference. So basically, you have a movies API. When you hit the movies API, it can call any of these, all movies, create, update, delete. But when you get some API request, you also get your code also gets a method along with it, which is either get, post, put, or delete. So according to the method, specific handlers would be called, and whatever the logic is written there, it will be implemented. So if someone wants to see all the movies, they will be using get method, and it will be showing all the movies. If they want to create movie, then they will be using post, and this is how things will go on. In the create movie endpoint, the developer will be writing the logic that they need to store into the database, or whether they want to retrieve from the database. And it's HTTP listen service, something like your application API would be running on this server port, basically 3000 port. And you can test your APIs in the applications. You can also test it from the terminal curl tool, or you can just have a UI interface. You can use Postman and use this API, and you can see the response as well in the same tool, which is quite common for the API developers. And next point is, whenever you are creating an API, you are actually basically the major concern would be how can you secure your endpoints, because anyone can hack, right? So in that way, there are two concepts which I'll mention. I'll not get into the depth because it might be a bouncer, but basic overview would be, you can use you will be using JWT, or you will be using CORS. So let me talk a bit about JWT. JWT is basically JSON Web Tokens, which are also pronounced as JWTs. So what happens is, whenever you are trying to log in into some account, so that account or your API needs to be get secured for the authentication purpose. So what happens is, you are using the browser, you are the user, you will be actually hitting the post API, which is authenticate with your username and password, and it will go to the server. This API request will be going to the server, and the server will be responding back with some bearer token, which is actually some, let's say that's some password or secret key, which is generated by the server. And in that way, then you will use that same JWT bearer token and for that specific API hit which you want to do. So all I mean to say here is, even if you want to view just the users, but if you have secured your API with the JWT, then there will be two processes. There will be two hits to the server. First is, you will try to authenticate, and server will return a bearer token, which will be again used by your API, actual API, which will return the result, and the server is returning a token, and server has that token, so it has the authority to validate the token. So it will validate it. If it validates it's successful, then it will return the resource. It will return the content which you are trying to access with the get API user. If it doesn't authenticate, then it will fail. So either there would be two cases. It will return either 401 or 403 status codes. So 401 is for when you are not authorized even to deal with that resource. You don't have the authorization to deal with the resource. And for 403 is forbidden. I'll talk this status code later on. And another component is CORS. So CORS is basically cross origin resource sharing mechanism, which is basically implemented in all the browser. So let's say you are whenever you want to access the resource which is on a different domain, and you are on a different domain, in that case you need to implement CORS in your code base. So for example, let's take an example as of let's say you want to allow only specific origins, specific domains to only access your API. So you will put here in the allowed origins, instead of asterisk means all, instead of asterisk, you will put the domain of that specific client. So let's say I have a client I need to expose my APIs only to them just to have a second layer of security. I'll just keep their domain here rather than actually keeping it all, because it will be, otherwise it would be usable by other people. It can, if it's exposed, people can use, other people can use it. So this is how you allow there, you basically give different headers. There's a different concept course which in which you send different headers for the basically authorization purpose. So all I mean to say is the CORS and JWT actually helps in security of your API, and CORS is very much prevalent in the browsers. It actually, if you are trying to access some resource from the browser, then browser has by default stopped the stops giving you the response from the resource which are actually on different domain. So in that case, you have to implement CORS either at your front end level or back end level. Next thing is, how can someone write test cases? Because when you're writing any kind of code base, unit test is very important, right? So I prefer using TDD approach, in which tests are written before the code base. It's before you write the logic itself. But generally, because of the scenarios, most companies are using, we write test cases after the code logic because of the delivery issues. So this is the code snippet. How can I write test cases for a simple code base in Golang? I'm using Testify library, which is quite famous too. This is a third-party library, but it is quite famous in Golang. Even though it's third-party, people use it for testing, and I have been using for the past 2 years. So this is my code base, which is just returning the summation of two values. What I'll try to do is I'll write the test case of the same function add. So it should be started with the test keyword before the function name, and I'll just have in any language, whatever the way you write the unit test, it's kind of similar. It's just a matter of different libraries and the way syntax are. So you are just having the add function total, and what will actually you'll get, and you can actually expect and actually check whether both are same or not. And this is how your test case will fail or it will pass. But this is the test case for the code base. But I want to talk about the writing test case for the APIs. So for testing the endpoints, you actually try to create a new request. You will create some mock API kind of thing, and you will actually get the response back from the same handler, which is actually the logic handler, and you can actually check the status code, or sometimes also the response body, if that could be similar. You can have that, and it's pretty straightforward. The HTTP new request I'm using. So HTTP is the net HTTP API library itself, which is the inbuilt library, which has a new request functionality. Here, the nil is actually body, because get APIs need not to have a request body. So that's why I'm putting here nil. But for testing post APIs, I will have some response request body. So for the request body, I'll create some hard-coded value for testing purpose I can create, and I'll just pass it here in the body, and everything is same. Here I'm creating the new request, which is getting recorded in the response, which will be thrown to the basically server. Whatever the APIs is, it will be, the response will be thrown, and the result would be actually through the endpoint post handler. And here you will get the response code or response body as well, and you can actually check if it's equal or not, what kind of data it's written. Generally we tend to check only the status code, because we can't have the similar kind of data every time, but yeah, ideally we should check. So let's see today what are actually the best practices. So as I mentioned, like once you start writing the API, the foremost things come is how to design your API. Second thing comes is when you start writing, how actually you secure your API. At the same time, we know that there would be feature enhancement which can break the code and all. So we should ideally, whenever we are starting the writing the APIs, we should write test cases at that moment itself. And apart from all these things, what are the other stuffs which you need to keep in mind while creating an API? So I'll talk about this is, so there is a concept of abstract and concrete APIs. So let's say, so I'll take this example here is, we generally try to generalize the things when we write code, because we think that it could actually, like when we are writing a code base for car or truck, we think that okay, there would be a possibility that there would be two-wheeler scenario as well. So we'll try to generalize it, abstract it in the form of vehicles, and then we implement vehicle for the car, right? So, but this shouldn't be the case in with respect to the APIs. That's completely two different things. That's for the code, but for the REST API, when you design the APIs, you should have concrete APIs. For example, these are entities of any blog, but you should not have single API for these things. You should modularize them, and each API would be having only one specific functionality. Like owners would be actually serving only one kind of resource, one dealing with one kind of logic. And blogs, similarly, like blogs and blog posts. But obviously we can write some entities and then have in the query parameters or headers, like I just need to have the information of owners, but actually those APIs are not very good designed. So this is why we should ideally go with the concrete approach. Next is, what is actually a bad URL or bad API? So these are the basically few examples. I'll demonstrate one by one. One is like, this is the get method and this is the API. So it will actually get all the movies because I'm using get method. So it will try to retrieve all the movies. But when I try to pass some value, which is ID here, so it will actually get all the movies by the ID. And it actually looks fine, right? If you have two APIs in your code base this way, it will obviously your code base will work perfectly, your functionality will work perfectly. But this is not the good design. Next is post API. You are saying add movies, you're trying to add movie, right? And for delete, you are trying to delete the movie number, movie with the ID 12. Last is you are trying to access the movies with the actor. So let's see what are the good APIs. These are the same stuffs which I mentioned, same functionality, but all these things could be actually handled with the single API, which is movies. Or if there is an ID, then we can have some ID field as well in the variable of the API. So what I'm trying to do is I'm actually using the same thing, but the methods are different. And this is how I'm demonstrating, and this is what I've already cleared in the starting slides, right? So all these functionalities are same. Everything will perfectly. It's just a matter of how you design your APIs. And next most important stuff is, how do you handle errors? So we know that we need to handle errors most of the time, because in production, if something fails, breaks, you can't figure it out why it is breaking. Like even if you log, right, it can break in the mid. So in that case, you should ideally handle the errors properly. You should throw back the errors with the code. So this is an example of Twitter API, which is actually sending response status of 400. Basically it's 400, and it could be in you can actually format your API errors in this way. You can just have a error model in which you can you can send the response of code and message that why it is getting filled and what's the status code, so that it could be actually helpful for the front-end developers as well, and also for you to figure out why things are not working if you have properly handled the errors in your code base. And as I mentioned about the status codes, so generally we tend to see 404 or 500 most commonly if we are not technical enough, but still we know that this is the server, right? We say that server is down. Then it in that case 500 status code is returned by the server, which happens because when you are trying to retrieve or try to post something, basically you are trying to talk to the you are trying to communicate with the server, but server is not there, server is not responding, then you get internal server error. There is some error issues. And if you're trying to access some information, some API or some web page which doesn't exist, then 404 will be thrown. And if it's, let's say it is in your code base, someone has requested something but it is not according to your logic, then it is actually a bad request. So basically the user which has requested which is trying to hit your API is actually giving you a bad request. So in that case you should return 400. So status codes plays a lot of role even while testing as well, even while checking actually checking what is the status code when you are debugging the stuffs, or also for the front end people. So for 200, okay, it's pretty straightforward. When everything is working fine, it is giving proper response, we generally give 200, okay. And when you are just creating a new resource, then let's say you just want to show that, okay, just it's a new resource, there is a new resource creation, then you just send 200 not. So these are very common status codes which at least people should follow. But apart from that, there are a lot of status codes like 401, 403, which is forbidden or authentication related errors. And the next thing is REST API versioning. So let's see, let me give you a scenario. Let's say you have a team. You work in a team and it's a microservices architecture. So my service is A, your service is B, and some other person's service is C. So my service is dependent on your service, which is B. C service is also dependent on you, which is B. So what happens is when there is a slight change in B, so when you are trying to change something in your code base, in your API, and if it's a backward incompatibility change, which means if it's a change which can break the existing users, like I'm also trying to access your API, my APIs will get affected because of your change, because I have a dependency on you. In that case, that is called backward incompatibility change, which is a breaking change in your system. So when these things happen, and this is quite very normal because other teams don't have the bandwidth, I might don't have the time to actually fix my code as per your code, because you are changing the things. It doesn't mean that I will have time to change my things, right? Things might take time at my end. So in that case, it is ideally advised to version your APIs when it is exposed to others. So when it is that this is a breaking change, you will try to version your API, which is going to be the breaking change. You can version it as v2. So I have given 2 examples. So these APIs are of the same service, but it might give different things, or there is a different scenario that if I will use v1, then I can't use v2 because of the breaking change. And slowly and gradually you can depreciate v1. And it is very obvious because people will actually try to upgrade the things, but things might take time. Till that time v1 fades away, you should ideally have v1 and v2 both running in your server, as because on you other people are also dependent. So this is very quite important aspect while dealing with the microservices architecture. Next is documentation. So as a developer, I have seen, or even myself, we try to avoid documentation, but your APIs are APIs. They're nothing good unless you document it. because if someone else is using, especially when it is an open source project, someone will try to see the example, someone will try to read, they won't have the time, or they won't try to actually read the code base, that what your APIs are doing, why is it actually do what actually it meant to do. So in that case, you should actually have proper documentation. You can use Swagger for API documentation. You should also have README, that what should someone do if it is an open source project. If you want obviously other contributors to join you, in that case you need to provide them a actual smooth path, people can use your APIs. Or let's say if you're working in a team, you leave that company, and you have built that API, then also in that case documentation is very important. So whenever you are writing something, please document, try to document, because your API is nothing, just a API. If it's not documented properly, it won't be utilized to that extent. So this is a bit about today, and I'll give you the demo accordingly. If you want to see the slides, this is the slide link which you can actually access if you want to get into the content. If you want to, if you have any queries, obviously we'll discuss this right now, we have time, but you can also ping me later on at Twitter, IANJNL, anywhere. So this is a bit, let's deal with the code base. I'll show you the demo. So whatever the demo I'll be showing, what's okay. Okay, I'll delete this. So whatever the things I'll show here might not be server level code, production level code. I'll just try to give you the starting. How can you actually proceed with the basic stuffs? And I'm assuming that people might be knowing the basic syntaxes of Golang. And if not, you can actually ask me later on once I'm completed. So in the starting, I mentioned that we can use the inbuilt library, which is NetHTTP, right? So what I'll try to use is, I'll try to import.
Joshna, we can't see your screen.
Okay, thanks once again. Oh, can I share? Okay, let me stop then share again. Can't I share everything? Okay.
Is it possible to share the desktop? I think you are sharing the browser window.
Yeah, I'm sharing the browser window. I tried to share the desktop. Okay, let me share. Can you see my screen?
We can see your browser. And, yeah, now we can see.
Okay. So what I'm trying to say is, I just have a basic level of code. I'll try to have basic API, then get involved with the mux. How can you involve mux? But it won't be the production level code. This is what the disclaimer I'll be trying to say, that this is not how we write in production even. That is more modularized. But in the starting, yeah, let's start with something. So basically, yeah. So I'll have main function where I can later on. I'll try to create a function which will have the APIs. So you can actually see that This is what it wants. I'm trying to have the handler, and if you remember this line which I mentioned, and I'll have the port, let's say 2121. Yeah, and since I don't have this handler declared, I'll try to. So this is the response writer, which will be actually thrown on the response body. And this is the request parameter, which will be actually having all the request related information, even its header related information. If you use this request, then you can see actually what are the parameters it's getting in the request. And I'll just try to use right. Let's say and we can also print anything. Let's, yeah, and it is good if I print it. So this println is nothing but start. It will just print on the std out, something like system.out println in Java. And I have not invoked this function, so I'm invoking it here. So what I'll try is I'll try to yeah, server.go. I'll run the server.go. Nothing. I'll build it and run it on the port 2211. So it says that application is started successfully. I will try to test it. So 21. Yeah. So yeah. So this is the API right now. My API is nothing. It's just a forward slash, which is actually a home page kind of thing. And I am just sending this string in the response body. So this is a very starting API, which is how I start with. And I am using handler function of HTTP inbuilt library, which will actually check whatever the API routes are there, and it will actually get into this, and it will perform all the logic which is written inside the handler. And yeah, it will run on the server to 2121. So this is how it is running, and this handler needs to be when I'm using the inbuilt library, I will give it as nil because I'm not using third party, and it will if I'm giving nil, then it will use the default mux. Basically default mux here means net HTTP, so that's why I'm providing nil. So this is the example for just a layman thing. So let's enhance this again. So this is the basic structure. So I'll try to get some data. So for that, I'll try to simulate the database because I don't want to interact with the database, but so I'll have the hard-coded values. This is one of the way where how we model in Golang. So I'm trying to create a dummy data structure. article I've created, and I'll try to have dummy data here, which could be something like article. I'll have it as an array of article, which will have ID as 1, let's say title as hello 1, description as DSC1, content as con1. I'll try to simulate dummy data. I'm trying to do this just because I don't want to deal with database. I'll have hard-coded values. Yeah, looks good. Okay, I can't use this, so I'll try to have a global variable, articles, and which have, so for this is a array type of article data type, array of article data type. Oh, why is it throwing some error? Yeah, it looks good, and I have created this thing. What I'll try to do is I'll create another API handler function. Pattern would be articles. So generally, when we are creating the API, then I could have mentioned this as article as well. But actually, it is better to have the plurals of the verbs, basically nouns. So you try to have this kind of structure, like you should have plurals basically. Let's say retrieve articles. I'll create another function handler, basically not function, with the same thing. I'll copy. Right, in the retrieve, what I can do is I can just avoid this. I can API. I can encode this. So I'll try to use basically, okay, let me write then explain you. The encode. Okay, new encode. Encode. This would be something I will return this articles. So what this line is doing, it is nothing. It is doing just this array of articles. It is actually this JSON.encoder is actually encoding into the JSON format, JSON string, and also at the same time it is also writing to the response. So it is like I am using writer. It is actually pushing the JSON string. It is first converting, encoding the array to the JSON string, and which is also getting pushed to the response body. So this is how it looks like, and I assume it looks fine to me. And let's see, let's stop the server, let's start again. Application started successfully. So my API is articles. If I hit the articles, then I should get these data basically, because this is the data I am hard coding and I am trying to simulate. Let's see if it works perfectly or not. Yeah, so I hope you got my point. Like this is how I created an API, and I'm getting the data. This data could be actually, it's hard coded right now, but it's generally from the code base database. Yeah, so this is how I'm trying to actually use it. But this I'm right now using net HTTP, which I mentioned, but now I'll show you how you can actually use Mux. So for Mux, what you need to do is, I have already mentioned this. You need to import this library. and in the handler request where your all the routes or APIs are mentioned, declared or designed, you will try to create one router object. I'm using this and I'm creating a new router. You can also have strict slash. Basically, if you want to read this, you can actually read everything. So in Go, this is a Mux third-party library, but it is very well written. So it actually defines a trailing slash behavior. So if you don't have even trailing slash, the APIs will work perfectly. It won't match. And all I'm doing is, instead of HTTP, net HTTP, I'll just replace HTTP with router. And if you remember, I mentioned that right now we are using net HTTP. That's why this handler is nil, because if I'm using nil, it will use the default mux. So in order to use Gorilla Mux, I need to pass it in the handler. So which is the router, which is the object of Gorilla Mux new router. So I'm passing it here. They won't be, if I'll try to run the hit the APIs, there won't be any change in the result. It's just that this is how you're gonna structure in the code base. So I've stopped the server. I'll run the server again. Application has started. So as soon as I'll try to hit this API first. Welcome. See, nothing is changed, right? Everything is same. It's just I'm right now using Gorilla Mux versus net HTTP. I hope I made some sense right now, that it's very straightforward to use Gorilla Mux. Gorilla Mux, I can, do we have time? I think, should I tell you one more example or should I close it right now, because we might have questions?
Yeah, we have time.
Okay, I'll show you one more API basically. So I was talking about ID thing, right? I'll create another article, which should be basically ID. So let's say I want to see the only this data, right? So I just need to, when I need to see only the articles by ID, so I'll actually fetch it with the ID. I'll pass it as a variable. So I'll pass this article and ID. So this ID would be passed in the API hit and I'll fetch it and I'll get to know. So I'll show you this return single article. Article by ID handler. I'll create this handler. So what I'll try to do is, in that, I'll just use the mux vars. So if you will see, okay, it will have the request. If you'll see the vars, it actually just written the route variables. So as I mentioned, this is the variable. So variable of the route is actually route variable, and it will actually, it can actually, you can actually get to know what is the value of the variable. So let's say it is, since my key value ID is the value, so I'll use the same thing here. And if I try to print, or let's say if I try to printf directly to the response body, then I'll just print key. So if I hit ID1, yes, it should work. I'll restart the server. Yeah. I'll open the Postman. So I just want to see the data of one article with the ID 1. Right now we had 2. Yeah, so I'll have just 1. But see, I'm returning, this is the ID, right? This is the route variable. So I am returning only key. So key here is 1. That means this is the key which will be returned. If I'll return 2, it will be returned 2. But now I want to see the data, whole data. So instead of returning this, I'll try to iterate through the articles basically, which is, so if I articles, we use range. If I want to use articles, if this is a common syntax in Go, and in that case, if this is article dot id, this is I am iterating through the whole article, this model, and in that, if my ID is equivalent to the key, which is 1 right now or 2, in that case, just send me this thing which we have mentioned for all the articles. I'll use it only for one article. Instead of that, it will be this way. Why is it showing? Okay, so I'm just trying to match it. If article ID is matching to the key, then it will send me the data. I'll stop the server, restart the server again. So this feature of getting the route variables, this is not there in the inbuilt library NetHTTP. So these are the few things which makes our API developers' life easier, because of which most of the companies are using Gorilla Mux or Echo or Gin, these kind of third-party routers or dispatchers basically. So right now I've given 2. If I give 1, it will give me the data of 1 only. So I hope I made some sense today, that I'm getting I can fetch the route variable with this thing, and I'm returning only whatever it matches with my key, whatever it matches with the route variable. So yeah, this is it for today. You can extend this for get and post, and you can also mention here methods. So this is how you can mention get method, post method for the same routes, but different handlers. So here it will create actually article. So for that, I have to create some function. Sorry. Yeah. Function create. In that, I'll have the logic again. Yeah. So I can just print something randomly right now with this. API, right? So if I use articles right now, if you'll see in the Postman, I'm using get. For the articles get and post, the content will be different. For the get API, things would be, okay, I have not run the server, stopped and restarted it. It's restarted, yes. So for the get thing, I'll get the articles, but for the post API, I'll just have the thing. So I hope you're getting the APIs are different, but the methods are different, due to which the handler's logic would be different, because you are calling different logics. Yeah, this is it for today from my end. Are there any questions which you want to ask? Let me stop sharing my screen. Yeah. Is there any questions which you want to ask? Please let me know.